The year 1977 in film involved some significant events, the biggest and most important of which was the release of Star Wars. Highest grossing films. The top 10 1977 released films by box office gross in North America are as follows. Events: March 28, at the 49th Academy Awards, Rocky picks up the Academy Award for Best Picture. Peter Finch, Faye Dunaway, and Beatrice Straight all win Oscars for their performances in Network for Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Supporting Actress, while Jason Robards wins for Best Supporting Actor for his performance in All the President's Men. He would win again the following year, becoming the only person to win 2 consecutive Best Supporting Actor awards. March 11, Walt Disney Productions releases The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, a compilation of 3 animated shorts. May 25, Star Wars opens in theaters and became the highest-grossing film of the year. The film revolutionizes the use of special effects in film and television production. It also popularizes the notion of omitting any sort of opening credits sequence. Lucas was told by the Screen Actors Guild that he must have an opening credits sequence, so he instead distributes the film independently, sans the opening credits. The film's release is often considered one of the most important events in the history of motion pictures. June 22, Walt Disney Productions releases The Rescuers, which brought back an interest in animation that had been lost to both filmgoers and critics throughout the beginning of the 70s. November 16, Close Encounters of the Third Kind opens to widespread critical acclaim and massive box office success, becoming one of the top-grossing films to date and cementing Steven Spielberg's status as one of the most talented and profitable film directors of all time. The average price of a movie ticket in the United States is about $2.25. Awards: Academy Awards, Best Picture, Annie Hall, Rollins Joff, United Artists, Best Director, Woody Allen, Annie Hall, Best Actor, Richard Dreyfuss, The Goodbye Girl, Best Actress, Diane Keaton, Annie Hall, Best Supporting Actor, Jason Robards, Julia, Best Supporting Actress, Vanessa Redgrave, Julia, Best Foreign Language Film, Madame Rosa, directed by Moshe Copyright Mizrahi, France, Golden Globe Awards, Drama, Best Picture, The Turning Point, Best Actor, Richard Burton, Equus, Best Actress, Jane Fonda, Julia, Musical or Comedy, Best Picture, The Goodbye Girl, Best Actor, Richard Dreyfuss, The Goodbye Girl, Best Actress, Diane Keaton, Annie Hall, Best Actress, Marsha Mason, The Goodbye Girl, Other, Best Director, Herbert Ross, The Turning Point, Best Foreign Language Film, A Special Day, Italy, Palm Dog, Father and Master, directed by Paolo and Vittorio Taviani, Italy, Golden Bear, The Ascent, directed by Larisa Shepitko, USSR. Notable films released in 1977, USA unless stated, Number 3 Women, directed by Robert Altman, starring Shelley Duvall, Sissy Spacek, Janice Rule, 21 Up, a TV-made documentary film, ABBA, the movie, directed by Lars Hallstra. Paragraph M, Airport 77, starring Jack Lemmon, Lee Grant, Brenda Vaccaro, Christopher Lee, Olivia de Havilland, Joseph Cotton, James Stewart, Alien Prey, directed by Norman J. Warren, starring Gloria Annan, Allegra Non Troppo, a musical animated film, Amar Akbar Anthony, starring Amitabh Bachchan, The American Friend, directed by Wim Wenders, starring Dennis Hopper and Bruno Ganz, Andy Warhol's Bad. Starring Carol Baker and Perry King, Annie Hall, directed by and starring Woody Allen, with Diane Keaton, Tony Roberts, Carol Kane, Paul Simon, Audrey Rose, directed by Robert Wise, starring Marsha Mason, Anthony Hopkins, John Beck, The Ascent, directed by Larisa Shepitko, An Average Little Man, directed by Mario Monaiseli, starring Alberto Sordi, B. Backroads, directed by Philip Noyce, The Bad News Bears in Breaking Training, starring Jackie L. Haley and William Devane, Black Joy, starring Norman Beaton, Black Sunday, directed by John Frankenheimer, starring Robert Shaw, Bruce Deren, Marv Keller, A Bridge Too Far, directed by Richard Attenborough, starring James Caan, Sean Connery, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins, Laurence Olivier, Ryan O'Neal, Robert Redford, The Brothers Lionheart, C. Candleshoot, starring David Niven, Helen Hayes, Jodie Foster, The Car, starring James Brolin, Sedo, directed by Esmail Sembani, Charleston, starring Bud Spencer, James Coco, Herbert Lom, The Chess Players, directed by Satyajit Ray, Chinatown Kid, directed by Chang Shi, The Choir Boys, directed by Robert Aldrich, starring Charles Durning, Louis Gossett, Jr., Perry King, Phyllis Davis, Barbara Roadies, Cinderella, starring Cheryl Rainbow Smith, Circuit No Oekami, Citizens Band, directed by Jonathan Demme, starring Paul Le Mat and Candy Clark, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Richard Dreyfuss, Frana Section Noir Truffaut, Bob Balaban, Melinda Dillon, Terry Garr, Cross of Iron, directed by Sam Peckinpah, starring James Coburn, Maximilian Schell, James Mason, Crossed Swords, starring Oliver Reed, Raquel Welch, Rex Harrison, Charlton Heston, George C. Scott, D. Damnation Alley, directed by Jack Smite, starring George Peppard and Jan Michael Vincent, Death of a President, The Deep, directed by Peter Yates, starring Robert Shaw, Jacqueline Bisset, Nick Nolte, Louis Gossett, Jr. Demon Seed, directed by Donald Kamal, starring Julie Christie, Desperate Living, directed by John Waters, The Devil Probably, directed by Robert Bresson, Darren Veer, starring Daundra, Dinner for Adele, The Disappearance, starring Donald Sutherland and David Hemmings, The Dog Who Loved Trains, The Domino Principle, directed by Stanley Kramer, starring Gene Hackman, Candice Bergen, Mickey Rooney, Eli Wallach, Richard Widmark, Dot and the Kangaroo, Double Murder, starring Marcello Mastroianni, Ursula Andress, Peter Ustinov, The Duelists, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Keith Carradine and Harvey Keitel, E.F., Eliza, Vida Mauer, directed by Carlos Saura, starring Geraldine Chaplin and Fernando Rey, Equus, directed by Sidney Lumet, starring Richard Burton and Peter Firth, Eraserhead, directed by David Lynch, starring Jack Nance, Executioners from Shaolin, Exorcist 2, The Heretic, directed by John Boorman, starring Richard Burton, Linda Blair, Louise Fletcher, First Love, starring Susan Day, William Catt, Beverly D'Angelo, Full Circle, also known as The Haunting of Julia, starring Mia Farrow, Keir Dullea, Tom Conti, Fun with Dick and Jane, directed by Ted Kotkeefe, starring Jane Fonda and George Segal. G. The Gauntlet, directed by and starring Clint Eastwood, with Sondra Locke, The Getting of Wisdom, directed by Bruce Beresford, Golden Rendezvous, starring Richard Harris, Anne Turkel, David Janssen, The Goodbye Girl, directed by Herbert Ross, starring Richard Dreyfuss and Marsha Mason, Grand Theft Auto, directed by and starring Ron Howard with Nancy Morgan, The Grateful Dead Movie, directed by Jerry Garcia and Leon Gast, The Greatest, starring Muhammad Ali as himself, H. Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo, directed by Vincent McVitie, starring Dean Jones and Don Knotts, Heroes, starring Henry Winkler, Sally Field, Harrison Ford, High Anxiety, directed by and starring Mel Brooks, with Madeline Kahn, Harvey Korman, Howard Morris, Cloris Leachman, The Hills Have Eyes, directed by Wes Craven, Hitler. A film from Germany, directed by Hans-Joachim G.N. Sibberberg, The Hobbit, an animated film, House, The Hunters, directed by Theodoros Angelopoulos, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, starring Kathleen Quinlan, In the Name of the Pope King, starring Nino Manfredi, Iphigenia, directed by Michael Soyanis, The Iron Prefect, The Iron-Fisted Monk, directed by and starring Sammo Hung, The Island of Dr. Moreau, starring Burt Lancaster, Michael York, Barbara Carrera, Islands in the Stream, starring George C. Scott, J. A. Martin Photographer, Jabberwocky, directed by Terry Gilliam, starring Michael Palin, Joseph Andrews, directed by Tony Richardson, starring Anne Margaret, Jubilee, by Derek Jarman, starring Adam Ant, Toya Wilcox, Little Nell, Julia, directed by Fred Zinnemann, starring Jane Fonda, Vanessa Redgrave, Jason Robards. The Kentucky Fried Movie, directed by John Landis, starring Bill Bixby and George Lazenby. Kingdom of the Spiders, starring William Shatner and Tiffany Bowling, The King of the Street Cleaners, Die Consequence, directed by Wolfgang Petersen, starring Jawan Quarter Gen Prickno, L. La Sofriere, a documentary film directed by Werner Herzog, The Lacemaker, starring Isabelle Huppert, the last remake of Beau Geste, directed by and starring Marty Feldman, The Last Wave, directed by Peter Weir, The Late Show, directed by Robert Benton, starring Art Carney, Lily Tomlin, Bill Macy, Eugene Roche, Joanna Cassidy. A Little Night Music, starring Elizabeth Taylor, Leslie Ann Down, Diana Rigg, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, directed by Richard Brooks, starring Diane Keaton, Tuesday Weld, Richard Kiley, Richard Gere, The Lorry, directed by and starring Marguerite Duras with Gar copyright Rad Depardieu, M. MacArthur, starring Gregory Peck, Madame Rosa, starring Simone Signoret, Academy Award for Best Foreign Film, The Magic Pony, Mama, Mama, I'm Alive, Man of Marble, directed by Anne Edgewater, The Man Who Loved Women, directed by Francesc Noir Truffaut, starring Charles Denner, Brigitte Fossey, Leslie Caron, Manly Times, directed by Eduard Zaharyov, starring Grigor Vashkov, Mariana Dimitrova, Velko Kanov, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, March or Die, directed by Dick Richards, starring Gene Hackman, Catherine Deneuve, Max von Sydow, Martin, directed by George A. Romero, Mimino, Mowgli Manti, Mr. Billion, starring Terence Hill, Valerie Perrin, Jackie Gleason, N.O., Nana, New York, New York, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. A Nice Plate of Spinach, Office Romance, Oh, God, directed by Carl Reiner, starring George Burns, John Denver, Terry Garr, Paul Sorvino, One-on-One, starring Robbie Benson, Annette O'Toole, G.D. Spradlin, One Sings, The Other Doesn't, directed by Agnes Varda, Opening Night, directed by John Cassavetes, starring Gina Rowlands, Cassavetes, Ben Gazzara, Orca, starring Richard Harris, Charlotte Rampling, Bo Derek, The Other Side of Midnight, starring Marie-France Bezier, Susan Sarandon, John Beck, Clu Gulaga, Ralph Vallone, Outlaw Blues, starring Peter Fonda and Susan St. James, PQ, Padre Padawan, directed by Paolo and Vittorio Taviani. Palme d'Or winner, Paphnutius Santo, Pete's Dragon, directed by Don Chaffee, starring Helen Reddy, Jim Dale, Mickey Rooney, Picture Show Man, starring Rod Taylor, A Piece of the Action, directed by and starring Sidney Poitier, with Bill Cosby and James Earl Jones, Plicow, Portrait of a Hitman, starring Jack Palance and Rod Steiger, Providence, directed by Alain Resnais, starring John Gielgud, Dirk Bogarde, Ellen Burstyn, Pumping Iron, a docudrama starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. A Race for Your Life, Charlie Brown, Raggedy Ann and Andy, A Musical Adventure, an animated film with the voices of Didi Conn and Mark Baker, Rembrandt 1669, The Report, directed by Abbas Kiarostami, The Rescuers, animated film with voices of Eva Gabor and Bob Newhart, Roller Coaster, starring Timothy Bottoms, George Segal, Richard Widmark, Henry Fonda, Rolling Thunder, starring William Devane, Roots, TV miniseries, starring LeVar Burton, Louis Gossett, Jr., John Amos, Cicely Tyson, Georg Stanford Brown, Olivia Cole, Ben Vereen, Rosalind, starring Teresa Wright, Geraldine Chaplin, Lou Jacoby, Christopher Walken, Ruby, starring Piper Laurie, S. Saturday Night Fever, directed by John Bartham, starring John Travolta and Karen Lynn Gorney, Scott Joplin, starring Billy D. Williams, Margaret Avery, Clifton Davis, Art Carney, Semi-Tough, directed by Michael Ritchie, starring Burt Reynolds, Chris Christopherson, Jill Clayburgh, Robert Preston, Bert Convey, The Sentinel, starring Chris Sarandon, Christina Rains, Joseph Copyright Ferrer, Martin Balsam, Ava Gardner, September 30, 1955, directed by James Bridges, starring Richard Thomas, Susan Tyrrell, Dennis Quaid, Tom Holjay, Dennis Christopher. The Serpent's Egg, directed by Ingmar Bergman, starring David Carradine and Liv Ullmann. Short Eyes, directed by Robert M. Young, starring Bruce Davison and Jose Perez. Sinbad in the Eye of the Tiger, directed by Sam Wanamaker, starring Patrick Wayne and Jane Seymour. Slapshot, directed by George Roy Hill, starring Paul Newman, Michael Ontkean, Lindsay Krause, Strother Martin, Smokey and The Bandit, directed by Hal Needham, starring Burt Reynolds, Sally Field, Jerry Reed, Jackie Gleason. Soldier of Orange, directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Rutger Hauer. Sorcerer, directed by William Friedkin, starring Roy Scudder. Special Day, directed by Ettore Scola, starring Sophia Loren, Marcello Mastroianni, John Vernon. Speed Trap, starring Joe Don Baker and Tyne Daly. Spider-Man, starring Nicholas Hammond. The Spy Who Loved Me, starring Roger Moore with Barbara Bach, Kurt Jarwan a GNS, Richard Kiel. Starship Invasions, starring Christopher Lee, Robert Vaughn, Helen Shaver. Star Wars, directed by George Lucas, starring Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Alec Guinness, Peter Cushing. Strosek, directed by Werner Herzog, starring Bruno S. and Eva Matz. Suspiria, directed by Dario Argento, starring Jessica Harper, Stefania Cassini, Alida Valli, Sweeney. Starring John Thor and Dennis Waterman. A Tale of Sorrow and Sadness, Telephone, directed by Don Siegel, starring Charles Bronson and Lee Remick. Tender dos Milagas, directed by Nelson Pereira dos Santos. Tentacles, starring John Huston, Shelley Winters, Henry Fonda. That Obscure Object of Desire, directed by Louis Bois Plus or Minus Well, starring Fernando Rey, Carol Bouquet, Angela Molina. That's Carry On. A compilation film featuring Kenneth Williams and Barbara Windsor. Thunder and Lightning, starring David Carradine and Kate Jackson. Tomorrow I'll Wake Up and Scald Myself with Tea. Tong Pan, The Turning Point, directed by Herbert Ross, starring Shirley MacLaine, Anne Bancroft, Tom Skerritt, Mikhail Baryshnikov. Twilight's Last Gleaming, directed by Robert Aldrich, starring Burt Lancaster, Richard Widmark, Charles Darning, Paul Winfield, Burt Young. UV, On-Site Bear Jenner, directed by Valley Export, Viva l'Italia. Starring Vittorio Gassman and Ornella Muti. Viva Nieville. Featuring Evil Nieville. W. The War in Space, Which Way Is Up? Directed by Michael Schultz, starring Richard Pryor, Margaret Avery, Lynette McKee. White Bim Black Ear, The White Buffalo, starring Charles Bronson, Jack Warden, Will Sampson, Slim Pickens, Kim Novak. Wilma, starring Shirley Jo Finney, Cicely Tyson, Denzel Washington. Wizards, animated film directed by Ralph Bakshi. The World's Greatest Lover, directed by and starring Gene Wilder, with Carol Kane, Dom DeLuise. Wounded Game, XYZ, The Year of the Hare, The Yellow Handkerchief, You Light Up My Life, starring Didi Conn. Births, January 7, Dustin Diamond, American actor. January 8, Amber Benson, American actress. January 13, Orlando Bloom, English actor. January 19, Taliesin Jaff, American voice actor. January 28, Joey Fatton, American singer and actor. January 31, Kerry Washington, American actress. February 16, Paul Britton, American actor and comedian. March 2, Heather McCombs, American actress. March 8, James Van Der Beek, American actor. March 9, Lydia Mackay, American voice actress. March 24, Jessica Chastain, American actress. March 25, Apamil Dgar Ramirez, Venezuelan actor. April 2, Michael Fassbender, Irish-German actor. April 10, Stephanie Shih, American voice actress. April 14, Sarah Michelle Gellar, American actress. April 20, Robert Wilford, English actor. April 23, Cal Penn, American actor. April 26, Tom Welling, American actor. May 13, Samantha Morton, English actress, May 16. Melanie Lynskey, New Zealand actress, Emla Anna Toranai, Icelandic singer. May 19. Kelly Sheridan, Canadian voice actress, June 1. Danielle Harris, American actress, June 2. Zachary Quinto, American actor, July 1. Liv Tyler, American actress, July 6. Craig Handley, writer, July 8. Marlo Ventimiglia, American actor, July 13. Kari Walgren, American voice actress, July 27. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Irish actor, July 30. Jaime Presley, American actress, August 2. Edward Furlong, American actor, September 15. Tom Hardy, English actor, September 25. Clea Duvall, American actress, October 7. Brandon Quinn, American actor, October 8. Jamie Marchi, American voice actress, October 11. Matthew Bomer, American actor, October 26. John Heder, American actor, November 10. Brittany Murphy, actress, November 14. Brian Detson, American actor, November 15. Sean Murray, American actor, November 16. Maggie Gyllenhaal, American actress, December 8. Matthias Schoenaerts, Belgian actor, December 10. Emmanuel Creekai, Canadian actress, December 15. Jeff Stultz, American actor. Notable deaths. Film debuts: Dan Aykroyd, Love at First Sight, Brian Dennehy, Semi-Tough, Mel Gibson, Summer City, John Goodman, Jailbait Babysitter, Steve Guttenberg, Roller Coaster, Tom Holje, September 30, 1955, Helen Hunt, Roller Coaster, Bruce McGill, Handle with Care, Kevin McNally, The Spy Who Loved Me, Sam Neill, Sleeping Dogs, Peter Slithwaite, The Duelists, Meryl Streep, Julia, Sigourney Weaver, Annie Hall. References: Star Wars, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved May 26, 2014. Smokey and the Bandit, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved January 26, 2012. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved May 26, 2014. Box Office Information for The Goodbye Girl. Worldwide Box Office. September 13, 2013. Saturday Night Fever, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved May 26, 2014. Box Office Information for Oh, God. The Numbers. Retrieved January 26, 2012. The Deep, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved May 26, 2014. The Deep, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved May 26, 2014. The Spy Who Loved Me, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved January 26, 2012. Annie Hall, Box Office Information. Box Office Mojo. Retrieved January 26, 2012. http://www.cataroo.com/tbriscu.html